Hi, and welcome to this session on Questions Are the Answers. I'm Lindley Craig, and I'll be your guide through this video. All right, let's get started and learn about what's going to be going on in this session. First, we're going to talk about why it's so important for us to learn about questions because, they are the answers. So then we're going to learn about what questions and what tips and techniques we have, as well as how to do those tips and techniques. And then throughout the entire program, and especially at the end, I challenge you to kind of notice, like, what is it that you notice? Was this information that you had heard before and it's a good refresher, or is this brand new information to you? Just what do you notice? All right, let's get started on the questions are the answers. So the reason that questions are so important to us as individuals is that they have a lot to do with our communication. And the way that our brain works is the reason why questions are so important. So our brain processes information through 5 senses. So we can hear things, we can see things, we can touch things, we smell things, and we, of course, eat things and taste things. So of all of the things that are going on, we have about 3 billion bits of information that are going on at the same time. And our 5 senses bring that information in, except our brain only has the ability to process about 200 or maybe even less thousand bits, to hundreds of thousands or less bits of information are actually processed by our brain. So what does the brain do with the rest of the billion bits of information that are going around us? Well, our brain deletes and distorts and generalizes that information. Now here's the catch. We all have that deletion, distortion, generalization pattern differently. Each one of us does this differently. So we have a different program. So you and I can be at the same event at the exact same time, and we can have that event be a different reality for you as it is for me. Because the way that we process information becomes our reality, becomes like our map of the world. So if I distort and delete and generalize one way, you might be doing it in a completely different way. In fact, I know you are. So your reality of one event and my reality of this same event is going to be completely different. So this is the reason why questions are so important, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take back some of the deletion, distortion, generalization, and at the same time, we're trying to investigate, what does your map of the world look like? And we do that through questions. All right, I hope that you understand why it's so important to ask quality kinds of questions, because when we do, we understand a map better, and we also are able to recover some information that might be missing. Okay, here we go. Let's talk more about what are the tips and techniques that we can do and use questions to help us find the answers. All right, we all know that there's 6 questions. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Okay? And in NLP, there's one specific one of these questions that we don't like so much. And that question is why. So why do we not like why? Well, here's the reason why we don't like why so much. Why is a question that has some past history for us and for most people that started in childhood. And perhaps maybe these kinds of questions sound familiar to you. Why did you do that? Why isn't your homework done? Why haven't you done your chores? Why are you so clumsy? So if we hear a lot of these kinds of why questions when we're growing up, we have a negative association to why questions in general because they put us on defensive. They make us have to explain the reasoning for our behavior. And the reasoning for our behavior, apparently our behavior is negative. So we have to kind of explain why we have this negative behavior. So that's one of the reasons why questions are not so great. They kind of focus on us giving a defensive answer. Even if the question isn't about us, we're still having that negative association to these why questions. So how do we avoid asking the question why when we really actually want to know why? Let's see. What we need to do is ask a different question. And that question is either going to be how or it's going to be what. So if I ask you the question, why did you do that? How can we create that question into something different that doesn't focus on why? So one way you can ask it is, how did you do that? So when we ask somebody, how did you do that? It's like we're being curious about what were the steps that they did to get to that particular result. So the person's now focused on the steps rather than on defending the steps. Get it? So then another way that you can ask that question is, what caused you to do that? So now we're looking at causation. We're looking at motivation. What motivated the person to do it? And you can ask it that way. What motivated you to do that, right? And that gives us the same reason why, but we are doing it in a way that the person is going to be less defensive, or perhaps not even defensive at all, because you're asking for their motivation. And now they're like, oh, what motivated me to do that? Well, I was motivated to put on my sweater because I was cold. Instead of going, why did you do that? Right? So we have this defensiveness that comes up with why. So let's ask a better question. How or what? So that's your first tip on questions are the answers. Replace why with how or what. Let's look at another tip. And this is about past and future. So when we look at, or when we have a question that focuses on the past, such as, what caused you to do that? What motivated you to do that? Or how did you do that? We're focused on what's occurred in the past, all right? And guess what? The past can't change. Yes, we can find out how they did it or what caused them to do that or the motivation behind doing it, but that really doesn't help to change anything. So when we're talking to people, it would be nice if we could ask them potentially, what would you do differently in the future? Or what would you do differently next time? Or how could you change that the next time you do that? So when we are focusing our questions on the future, then we have an opportunity to allow the person that we're speaking to explore and empower themselves to change. Right? So maybe the event or the situation wasn't so great, but now instead of focusing on something that they've done that we can't really do anything about, now we can focus on, oh, here's this alternative way of doing it. And we're not going to give that to them. We want them to explore it themselves. So what could you do differently in the future? So this allows that person to be able to explore, to learn new things, and we're there as sort of the guide to do that through our questions. So when we ask questions, sometimes it's better to ask questions that are future oriented rather than past oriented. So that's your second tip. The second tip, past versus future. Move your questions to the future if you're after the person that you're speaking with having an empowering moment for themselves and perhaps also learning about change. All right. Tip number 3. So sometimes when we ask questions, we have a tendency to be sort of like a police officer interrogating somebody. All right. And this is like the 20 questions kind of thing. And it sounds something like this. Is your name Lindley? Yes. Are you an NLP trainer? Yes. Do you speak Russian? No. Do you live in Sweden? No. Okay, so These are the types of questions that we ask somebody. They give us information, but they don't give us a lot of information. What we're kind of looking for is something that's going to connect us with that person. That's why we communicate in the first place. So when we ask these types of questions, it closes down the communication. When we ask questions that are yes or no, or just require like a one-word answer, like how was your day? Fine, okay, good. When we ask those types of questions, we've actually closed the conversation down. So those are called closed questions for a very good reason. Well, what about an open question? What does that sound like? An open question gives us the ability to open the conversation, to be able to expand it, to really be able to connect with somebody on a deeper level. So the other day, I was with my friend at her house, and she was getting ready still, and her son had come home from school. And so instead of asking him the normal question, how was your day, or how was school today, I kind of know something different. I wanted to ask him an open question that would allow him to explore something about his day, and that I could almost guarantee that he was going to answer it with some kind of story about his day. So the question that I asked him was, what was the thing that happened in school today that made you laugh? And he just looked at me and he goes, oh, what happened in school today that made me laugh? Oh. Well, it wasn't really a laugh. It was more like a giggle. But see, here's what happened. And so he starts the story, and he starts telling me the story about what happened in school that made him giggle, right? And so that is the way that we use open questions to enhance our communication, to enhance someone else's communication with us, and to recover some of that deletion, distortion, generalization, as well as being able to explore their map of the world. So then we have this thing called clean questions. And I'm sure that perhaps maybe over on your side, you might be asking the question, what's a clean question? Is it the difference between clean and dirty? No, it's not clean or dirty. Well, I suppose it could be dirty question. The question that is a clean question is a question that I don't put any of my map of the world into the question. So let me give you a couple of examples. Do you remember the question at the beginning? Why are you so clumsy? That is a dirty question. Not really, but I mean, it's a question that contains my map of the world. So in my map of the world, there's a certain behavior that you've done that I identify as clumsy. So I have a meaning behind what clumsy is. And I've told you that you're doing that behavior that I call clumsy. And not only are you doing the behavior that I call clumsy, you're doing it a lot. Because I've said to you, why are you so clumsy, right? So I've told you you do it a lot in my world. And that's my map of the world. And even the question that I asked my friend's son, what was it at school that made you laugh? That is my map of the world, because I have assumed that something happened in his day that made him laugh. And I also put my NLP into my question because I asked him a question I knew was going to lead to open communication. Now, so those are kind of things that, even though the open communication is not really a dirty question, it does lead to more communication and more connection. But it's not a clean question. So clean questions keep all of our frames, all of our meanings, all of our map of the world out of the question. So let's explore 5 clean questions that can help you to ask questions in a way that keeps your map of the world out of it and focuses on investigating other people's maps. All right. So this, I actually had a really cool event at the UK NLP convention where Sue Knight was speaking, and she presented this information. And she got this information from Penny Tompkins and James Lally. And they're you can have their website at the very bottom of the page. So they focus on clean language. And so this is coming from their stuff. So there is actually 9 basic clean language questions, but we're going to focus on just 5 of them. So the first one I want to focus on is what happens just before. So this is a kind of like a timeline thing. So if somebody is telling me a story about their boss having an argument with them and their boss was really angry, maybe one of the questions I'm going to ask them is, oh, and what happens just before that situation with your boss that your boss was really angry? So that's what I'm going to say, and I'm going to use their words and their map of the world of that situation. And I'm going to ask them, and what happens just before that? And another question I can ask them that's more sort of present related, and what kind of is that? So if somebody says to me that they had an argument with their boss, I'm going to ask, and what kind of argument with your boss was that? So it's their map of the world that there was an argument. I'm just asking what kind of an argument was it? That gives me more information because their definition of an argument and my definition of an argument might be 2 entirely different meanings. So I'm exploring their map of the world without putting my map of the world inside of it. Let's look at another one. And is there anything else about that argument you had with your boss? So this question gives us the ability to get more information, to allow the person to tell us more about the situation. And that helps us to recover some of that deletion, distortion, generalization. So the more information they give us about their map of the world or their map of that situation, the better off I am and the more information that I have. The next one is, and what happens next? Now, there's 2 ways that somebody can interpret that question. I could ask that question to somebody, and what happens next? And they might take the interpretation of that question as, what was the next thing that happened in that situation? Now, they also might take that question as, and what happens next? Like, what are they going to do next about that situation? I don't know which way they're going to go. It's their map of the world when I ask that question. So when I say, and what happens next, the person might say back to me, well, I don't like working for bosses who are screaming and angry and have fights with me, so I'd rather work for somebody else. So that might be the kind of answer that someone gives me. They might also say, if I ask, and what happens next, they might just say, oh, and then somebody else came along into the conversation and we started talking about this. So it kind of depends on how they interpret my question. But my question is still clean. I haven't put my map of the world inside of it. Now, here's the last one that we're going to focus on. The last one is, and that's like what? And that situation with the argument with your boss is like what? It might be another situation they have in their life. It might be another situation they've had before. It might be something completely different. What we're asking them for is a metaphor or a symbol. By asking the question, and it's like what? We're trying to get them to compare 2 things. And it's up to them and their map of the world to explain to us what else is it like. And so this is the really cool thing about metaphors, is we use metaphors in our communication quite often and don't even realize that we're doing it. So we did a practice session for the NLP Association in Singapore, where one of the things that we did was we asked someone to sit and describe what they did for a living. And their partner would jot down all of the metaphorical phrases or words that they used in their description. And everybody was quite amazed how often they did it, even when they were just talking about what they did for work. So we know that people use metaphors and symbols quite often because it's the way our brain works. So this question allows us to start exploring that map of the other person's world with this metaphorical question. question. And what is that like? So I think those are the 5. And some people ask me, like, why don't you go over the rest of them? And I said, some of the questions are very specific to what I believe is my map of the world, certain people. So when I ask somebody, and where is it? Some people just cock their head to the side and go, I don't understand the question. So, a situation was happening with, an angry boss and they're having a fight. And I said, and so whereabouts is that? They might tell me an actual location, which is fine, but it doesn't give me a lot more information. But if I ask certain types of people, they're going to give me a location about the feelings of that event. So they're going to give me like, oh yeah, I could just feel that the issue with my boss right in the gut, my stomach, or just my heart hurt every time she yelled at me. So they have a different kind of response to the question. I just find that only certain people do that and other people just kind of look at me strange. So in my map of the world, I don't go into the where questions very much. I focus on the 5 that I know, and 5's a lot to learn and to practice anyway. So those are the 5. So you have why, and how to change why to what or how. So that was tip number 1. And then tip number 2 was changing questions that are related to the past into the future. And then tip number 3 was about closed questions versus open questions, and how open questions can help you connect and go deeper into exploring somebody else's map of the world. And this last one, of course, the 5 clean questions, keeping your map out of the situation and focusing on the other person's map. Now, some of you have heard some of this before, and that's fantastic. It's a refresher. And some of you came in completely with no understanding of any of this at all. So for those of you who come in that you didn't know about clean questions until this video, you came in what we call unconsciously incompetent. You didn't know what you didn't know. And so that's how you start with information, right? But that quickly changes to now that you know that about clean questions, and you know about why, and you know about past versus future questions, then now you're consciously aware, but you're still incompetent in the fact that you haven't actually practiced any of this stuff yet. So it might sound kind of weird to have to try to change your questions from why to how or what. And that might seem really, really awkward to start with. But as you practice, you become consciously competent. So you're still thinking about asking an open question instead of a closed question, but it's easier for you to do the more and more you do it. And then you continue on and you continue to practice and you become unconsciously competent. So just like that, you just stop one day asking questions that are why, or asking questions that are yes or no, because now you're consciously competent at these skills. So here is my challenge to you. Take one technique of this video and practice it for 30 days. Now at the beginning, of course, remember, it might feel a little awkward, and that's because you're actually mapping a new neural connection in your brain. That awkward feeling is like your brain doesn't actually know which direction to go yet because the pathway hasn't been repeated enough for it to create itself into a habit. So now, if you do it for 30 days, that neural pathway keeps going and connecting, and now it's easier to do the more often you do it. Just pick one technique of the 4 to practice for 30 days, and that's my challenge to you. There's some more information down below about other exercises you might want to try that we did in our live practice session. And that's it for this particular session and this video on questions are the answers. Hope to see you in the next video.